Continuing our reading in Abraham Hannibal and the Battle for the Throne by Francis Summers Cox. Today is chapter 14, Flood, the date June to July 1707. It looked as though Father Simon was right. The journey from Moscow to St. Petersburg certainly seemed to have a curse on it. It took them over 4 weeks to travel the 400-odd miles, through wild forests and across marshes buzzing with mosquitoes, on horseback or bumping in dreadful bone-shaking carts, with more than 20 rivers to cross, not one of them with a bridge or a ferry. However you went, it was no quicker than walking. And when Abraham arrived at the 4-year-old city, he could well believe it was cursed. Nothing but gray sky and a great gray river flowing through gray marshes into the gray sea. Almost the only proper building was a fortress, and even that was only wood and earth. As Peter and his followers approached it, and the little log cabin nearby, which was his palace, while he was here, they passed through the crowds of workers, their bony faces gray with mud and hunger, gray with sickness and tiredness, their ragged clothes and their hands caked with gray mud, as they struggled to shift the soggy soil without spades or wheelbarrows, digging foundations and canals with their hands, shifting the mud in their cupped hands or in the corners of their shirts. Their homes were nothing but the most dreadful shacks. Abraham's heart sank. Has the Tsar gone mad? This can never become another Moscow. But here and there were a couple of dozen reasonably solid wooden houses, even some ground ones belonging to nobles, and near Peter's little log cabin was a cheerful inn where they could have some merry evenings. And on the plans and drawings, the new city looked wonderful. Canals, bridges, streets, shops and tall palaces, gardens and churches, statues everywhere. There would be parks with fountains and statues with little clipped trees. It all started to remind Abraham of something. Of course, the pictures of France and of the Sun King's palace in Dr. Ponset's books. He'd spent hours looking at those amazing drawings back in Ethiopia. He asked Peter about that. Your Majesty, in France there is the Sun King. He has palaces and parks like these. Are you making a city like the Sun King's city? Peter laughed. What do you know about the Sun King, my young African? Well, in a way, you are right. I am looking for the new ways of building. This is going to be a new kind of city for Russia. I've had enough of old Moscow. It is full of bad memories for me, but here, my new city is going to be paradise. Abraham nodded. He understood about bad memories. But then something happened that made paradise seem a long way off for St. Petersburg. One night, a strong wind started to blow in from the sea and blocked the great river from flowing out, so it emptied itself sideways. The city was at sea level, and it didn't take much to flood it. The first that Abraham knew about the flood was when he was woken by a nasty, damp feeling underneath him. He was sleeping on a mattress outside Peter's bedroom door in the little log cabin, and he felt him all around himself. He found that he was soaked through, and the floor was awash. He jumped up and beat hard on the Tsar's door. He could hear the water creeping in under it. Master, your Majesty, water! Much water in all the house! Peter and his fellows got themselves out and into little boats. They suffered wet feet, but nothing worse. A fierce wind was howling in off the sea. The water rose fast, roaring and bubbling up from all the different branches of the river and the half-dug canals, rising higher and higher up the walls of the houses, inside and outside. Bits of huts, bits of building materials, even clothes and food came bobbing higgledy-piggledy along in the rushing water. Everywhere people were paddling their boats along the streets or huddling, wet and miserable, in trees or on their roofs. What a sight, said the Tsar. Look at them all up there, perched like a lot of birds. And he laughed. Isn't it a fine sight, men? At that moment, Abraham decided that he hated his master. On one roof that barely poked up out of the raging water sat a young man, hunched and weeping. What are you crying for? bellowed the Tsar against the roaring wind. "It'll all be over soon." "It's over already," came the man's thin, strained voice. "She's dead." And he opened his arms to show a little child lying on his lap. "Drowned, drowned." And then he burst out violently, "I curse this city! I curse our Tsar who makes us live here!" Abraham and the other men gasped and looked at Peter in panic, but he remained calm. There was no sign of one of his rages. "I know that many have died and will die to build this city," he said quietly to those near him, "but it has to be. I will die for her too, if I must. Row on." By nightfall, the waters had drained away. The log cabin was stinking and clammy. Abraham slept badly on his soggy mattress, and when he did manage to sleep, his dreams were filled with drowning and death. His father Phares, the lord of the sea, sitting on the roof of a flooded shack, holding Lahaya's body in his arms, and moaning over and over again, "Drowned, drowned, drowned." But when his father turned his head and looked at him, he had the face of Peter. That's the end of chapter 14.